Hello and welcome to Shoot the Gap on Fantasy and Frames. Tonight, 2-round rookie IDP draft. You want to get it before the NFL draft happens tomorrow. Stick with us. We're going to tell you all the IDP news you need to know about these young guys. See you in a second. I am all by myself tonight. I'm Justin Taylor, JT Orange on the X, Twitter. I'm the host of Stew with JT Brew. Jorge could not join me tonight. He had some family stuff going on, so he was hanging out. I am going to go solo tonight, so stick with me here. I am going to do, I should say, a 2-round rookie IDP mock draft. Kind of got to go through some of my 5 favorite guys. These are going to be based off my IDP rankings over on DLF. We just did a DLF 2-round mock draft with a bunch of different writers there, and I will maybe reference some of those picks and what some of those guys said as well to some of the players they liked. Obviously, these will change with landing spots, what we see tomorrow night in the NFL draft. But this is I always like doing this. I always tell people, they're like, why would you do a draft before the NFL draft? Isn't that going to change where you're taking guys? Absolutely. 100%. I'm going to take somebody in a different spot depending on where they'll land. But I have learned doing these drafts beforehand really shows you where you like guys, the players you really like, talent-wise on the evaluation side. And then you can go and say, hey, is this a good landing spot? Is a bad landing spot? How much does a landing spot affect how much I like one of these players? And so I've learned in the past where I've taken a landing spot, a guy gets what seems to be a nice landing spot, and maybe that guy is pretty far down my rankings, and then I want to take him a lot earlier, and I have to look at that again and says, does this make sense? Is that landing spot so good that he moves up past 10, 15 other players I originally liked more than him? Is the landing spot so bad that a player I liked really early, now I'm taking super late? So that's what I want to look at, because I always want to take those rankings and I want to see like how they match. I want to see my rankings beforehand, and I want to do a rankings after the draft. And then that's where I'm going to decide, okay, these are where I'm starting to take these guys. This is where it makes sense to me. As always with IDP, it depends on your scoring. So definitely look at your scoring before you make picks. It also depends on what you need. Sometimes we say take talent over need. Sometimes you just need a position. Sometimes you need linebacker, and maybe you take that linebacker over a defensive end that maybe is a little higher rated for most people, but you are desperate need of a linebacker, so you go get that linebacker. So always want to put that out there for everybody. I want to say hi, Jamie. Thanks for joining us. Hi, my AD peeps. Thanks everybody who's jumped on so far. I'll get through this. Any questions, go ahead, hit me up in the comments. If you got question about a certain player, where they're taken. I'm not really going to get into who I think is going to take who. There's a lot of mock drafts out there. It's kind of crazy right now. If you want me to throw out a guess, I'll do that. But it could be all over the board. And right now, mock draft wise, everyone's fired up about the offensive players in fantasy football. You look at these mock drafts, you just see all the offensive guys, all the quarterbacks, everybody just keeps moving them up, and all the defensive players are dropping. Well, we've learned that's just not the way it usually happens in the NFL. You still need defense. You've got to rush the passer. You've got to cover the wide receivers. You need those guys. And again, like some positions, just because a guy gets drafted later doesn't mean he's not more of a fancy asset. Just because a linebacker goes in the second, third round doesn't mean he can't be IDP 101 for you. Just because that defensive end went in the top 10, depending on who it is, where he goes, doesn't mean that guy's got to be the number one pick. So that's something you always got to look at IDP, because those things can always slightly adjust. It really depends on your scoring, stacks, turnovers, takeaways, tackles. Obviously, any tackle heavy leagues, you're looking at linebacker and box safety. So that's my little intro here to kind of get you set up on where I'm going with this. I will tell you, I'll talk about a little bit about cornerbacks and defensive tackles, because again, in certain leagues, you don't start those positions. So those guys will fall in your rankings and my rankings in leagues that I don't start those positions. But I will talk about both of those kind of as we go through here. So I'm doing this draft kind of based off my rankings. I will throw some other stuff, like I said, from some of the other DLF writers that we just did a 2-round mock draft. If you're a DLF member, jump over there and check that out. Also, get on there to go our overall rankings behind all the IDP guys, but also you can jump into my personal rankings, which I'm going to kind of go off here tonight. So, the number one guy, everyone's kind of expecting him to come off the board. He's still my number one right now, with a little bit of a caveat. So, Dallas Turner, edge rusher, Alabama. Right now, he's looking like he's top 10. A lot of people have him going to Atlanta. Maybe some teams moving up for him. I've seen him drop. But again, mock drafts are what they are. A really talented guy. Can come from the outside. A lot of speed. Coming from Alabama, you're going to get the Will Anderson comparisons. Do I think he's Will Anderson? No. I don't think he's as good as Will Anderson. So if you were taking Will Anderson really high in your IDP leagues last year, I totally understand that. He was going anywhere from late second round to early third round in a lot of my IDP leagues, depending on the scoring and kind of where people draft in those leagues. I'm not taking Dallas Turner as high as I took Will Anderson last year. I'm just not. I like him a lot. He's a little undersized. He does have ability. I think he needs to be in the right system, the right fit. I think you're going to get that draft capital with him, but I want to see where he goes. I want to, if he ends up on a team with another good edge rusher where he's not getting all the attention, I like that a whole lot more. If he goes somewhere where it's just him, I'm going to be nervous. A lot of people have him go to Atlanta. Atlanta has really struggled with edge rushers. I don't know what it is, but they just, every guy they try, every guy they draft, every guy they trade for just hasn't had a lot of success. So that is going to be a little bit interesting to me. I got another question here from Jamie. Says, thoughts on Turner versus Verse. What's your favorite landing spots for them? I think Turner goes over Verse, but I am one of those people who's not shocked, depending on where they fall. If Turner falls a bit, like say a team's trade up, pass him, could he go later, and could someone like Verse better? Right now, I got Turner number one in my rankings. I've got Verse number 4 overall. Verse is a little bit older. So dynasty wise, defense, I don't think we think about it just as much as we do offense. Versus 23, Dallas Turner's 21. The one thing about Verse that you really can say for him, consistency. 40 tackles, 9 sacks each of the last 2 years at Florida State. So it's not a guy he has a 1-year wonder. I think he can be elite edge, 6'4", 260. I think it's going to come down to fit and what team ends up deciding whether they take him. I could see a team liking Verse more than Turner for their defensive system. And I think more than anything in the NFL, when you're talking about these edge rushers, it isn't clear cut who goes where. And that's because I think teams really look at what they need defensively and what works for them. Are they running a 4-3? Are they running a 3-4? Does a guy need to drop into coverage? How does he blitz? Is he a guy that's coming just from the outside and he's got to win one-on-ones? Is he a guy that you can get twists and make moves and different things you need out of him? Is it a guy who needs to bump inside sometimes for you? And so I think those things matter big time for defensive coordinators and when guys are drafting. I think they have a list like, hey, this guy fits our system. This guy, we like him. He doesn't really fit us. If he falls to us in a crazy scenario, then maybe we take him, but we'd probably take this other guy instead. And that's where I see sometimes in the draft, people are always a little surprised where some cornerbacks go, some safeties go, some DNs go. And I think a lot of times it's fit. NFL teams are not worried about, oh, is this the best value on this guy if they're going defense? They're going best fit. And so I think that makes a difference. I'm with Turner Verse. Again, to answer Jamie's question, I think they're very close. Very close. If Verse ends up, I think Verse is more of a 4-3 guy for sure. I could see Turner because he's a little undersized. I could see some teams trying to, at a 3-4 team, trying to put him as an outside linebacker and kind of use that at his athleticism and kind of see how that works. So that's definitely something I could see there. Depending on where they land, and who's on that opposite side, I could see myself taking Verse over Turner. So thanks for that question. I appreciate it. Moving on in my rankings there, like I said, Turner's number one for me. He's probably my number one IDP off the board. Number two for me, and this one is tough because I have some teams that he's going to be my number one player, and that is Michigan linebacker Junior Colson. So I have been super high on this guy the entire offseason, the whole draft process. I've been huge on Colson. He's been anywhere between linebacker 3 and linebacker 5 or 6 for most people in their rankings. I've had him at the top of my rankings from the beginning. If you look at NFL draft places right now, look at DraftKings, look at FanDuel, Colson's moving up. He now is the favorite to be the number one linebacker, where Edgerrin Cooper in almost everyone's rankings is ahead of Colson. But if you look at the draft prospect numbers and what the gambling odds are right now, Colson's actually ahead of Cooper to get drafted in front of him. So that says a little bit of something. The reason I like Colson, and I'll go into this for you right now on DLF, he's currently overall ranked is fifth in our IDPs. I have him number 2 in mine. Like I said, he's right behind Dallas Turner, but there's definitely leagues I need linebacker, and I'm going to take Colson over Turner at that linebacker spot. And here's why I like him. The guy's got athleticism. He's got toughness. He's not the most athletic guy in the group, but the guy is a football player. There's certain positions you just want guys that are just tough nosed football players. O line, linebacker, those are those guys you need them to know the game, and they just play hard all the time. He's very good in pass coverage, which means he's a 3-down linebacker to me. He's not a guy you're going to have to take off the field on third down, on third and longs. He's going to be in there. He's a sure-handed tackler. The guy played almost all last season for the national champion Michigan Wolverines with a cast on his broken hand. And the guy still was making tackles. He still wasn't missing tackles. Highly underrated on that side of things. A super low missed tackle percentage for him. The guy is just really, really sure-handed. And like I said, for me, his toughness and his grit, he just always seems to be around the ball. Whenever you have a guy that's a leader of the number one defense in the nation, as in college, and they win a national championship, that bumps you up my list. That means you're the guy everyone else is following. He, to me, is a guy that can come in, wear that green dot as a rookie, and immediately be a stud in an offense. And if you're new to IDP, green dot is usually the guy that's calling the plays on defense. They have the green dot on their helmet. That usually means they're kind of one of the captains on the defensive side of the ball. Those guys are in there all the time. I can see Colson being that guy. Obviously, any Michigan player is going to get mocked to the Chargers. So I've seen quite a few where they have him going in the second round to the Chargers. If Colston goes, honestly, if he goes in the third round for me, that doesn't affect me. I still want him. I still think he's one of the best linebackers in the group. And even a Dallas Turner going first round, top 10, and Colson going third round, they're going to be right there for me, very close together on where I take them, just because I just think Colson, to me, has a chance to have a really long, very solid career. I just get like the Bobby Wagner vibes from him. A guy that's just going to always be in the mix, always making tackles, puts a 10, 12, 14-year career together. And so I like the longevity of him. I just think the floor is so high for him. I just think that he's going to be a good player no matter what. Could you get that explosive guy that makes plays and turnovers and scores you a ton of IDP points? Yes, I think so. But I just love that his floor is so high. I think he can be solid kind of no matter what. So those are my top 2 right now. Dallas Turner, Junior Colson is number 2 for me. Number 3 for me, and we just kind of talked about him, and I brought up Jared Verse. He's number 4, so I'll talk about both these guys a little bit here. Edgerrin Cooper, the linebacker from Texas A&M, the guy just athletic freak. I mean, he is really high up on people's charts just because of the athleticism. The guy can pressure the quarterback. He's good in coverage. This last year for him was really kind of his breakout year. So you're kind of a little bit worried about that. He's 22. Didn't have a big season until his last year, but everything kind of shows that he can be that playmaker linebacker in the right system where you can rush him, he can make tackles, he can play in secondary. And obviously, guys that stay on the field for as many snaps as possible is what's super important in IDP. You got to have guys on the field. Guys that are coming off and only playing part-time, it just kills their value in IDP. So he's a guy that's going to be up there for sure. Just the athleticism. Somebody's going to fall in love with it and think they can do something special with it. To me, I like Cooper a lot. I want to see him on a defense where the D coordinator is just very aggressive. That he does differently. He is sending linebacker. He is making plays to make the offense kind of adjust to what the defense is doing. Cooper feels like he's a player that works better in that system for me, just because of the athleticism and all the things you can do with him. So I really like Cooper. Like I said, most people he's our LB1. Right now on DLF, he's our overall ranking. He's our number 2 player on DLF. I have him as my number 3 just because I just like Colson's floor so much more. I just think he has, I think there's less chance that Colson doesn't make it as a really good pro. So that's kind of where I'm out on that. I got a couple more things here. So asking about Jamie's asking about Peyton Willis as the top linebacker. So Peyton Willis, for anybody that doesn't know about him, kind of getting late star on here, linebacker at North Carolina State, very talented guy, absolutely lit up the combine. 40-yard dash, 4.43. 4.43 for a linebacker is just off the charts. The guy has had some injury concerns, so that's the little bit of the holdup on Peyton Willis. Our team's going to shy away just a little bit because of that, because he has been banged up. And we've seen it, and this is not a player-to-player comp, but we've seen it with a guy like Shaq Leonard for the Colts, a guy that was a little bit undersized, but just athletic as could be, flies all over the field, makes plays everywhere. The guy was electric, but the injuries piled up on him. And I think that's where you have a few teams worried that might be the Peyton Wilson situation. Can he stay healthy if he is flying all over the field, making the plays that you want him to make with that athleticism? How long does he stay on the field? So he's another guy that I think a lot of people originally were thinking he might be LB1 or 2. He's a little lower on my list. He's LB3 for me, so he's not crazy behind Colson and Cooper. I like those guys a little bit more. Injury concerns for me a little bit. I have him as my IDP number 6 currently. A really nice landing spot. He's a little older as well. He's 24, so that's another one of those things for him. Injuries, plus he's a little bit older, but you love the athleticism. Right now, he's right in that mix for the number 4 overall player on our DLF side. I've got him at 6 right now. I do like him a lot. I want to see where he lands. I want to see what kind of position he's going to be in. He feels like a linebacker, that a team that runs a lot of nickel, only 2 linebacker sets. Like, he's a guy who'll probably be well there because he'll be playing in space, able to make plays. So I like him a lot as far as that's concerned. Now we're going to bring up Verse, who I just talked about, Jared Verse, Florida State. So he was the guy I talked about earlier. He's number 4 for me. He's number 3 on the DLF list right now. I like him a lot. Like I said, right now, my edge, he's my number 2, right behind Turner. And I feel like they're really close. And depending on where they go in the draft, that could slightly change for me. My edge number 3 and my number 5 player overall, just ahead of Wilson, Leatu Latu. The guy is just got insane rush skills. UCLA product. He's a guy that was injured. Actually, retired from football for a little bit, came back and just was great for UCLA. So the big thing for him is going to be when he's totally healthy, he could be the steal of the draft. He could be the most pure edge rusher in this draft. Now, how much are the medicals going to scare off teams? That's the big question. And that's what we'll see tomorrow night in the NFL draft. If he goes top 10 or 12, to the moon with him. Teams feel great about him. I think you get all over him. I'm drafting him early in my drafts. If he falls late first round, I don't think he gets out of the first round, but if he falls late in the first round, then maybe you go, okay, maybe some teams are passing him on the medicals. But if somebody crazy, say Atlanta gets crazy, they pass on Dallas Turner and they take Latu as the number one defensive player off the board and the number one edge, I got to reevaluate and say, should he be my guy in that spot? Like I said, probably the highest upside of all the edge rushers in this draft, but the medicals are slightly concerning. So that's where you got to kind of look and see, hey, is the NFL really concerned about it, or they feel pretty good about it? That will make a little bit of a difference for him. After Wilson at 6, number 7 on my list, Johnny Jerzon Newton. So he goes by Johnny, the defensive tackle out of Illinois. So this will be where I give you guys my first kind of like, you know, like a little bit like OPS. Let me give you a say. If you're in a league without defensive tackles, like you start just D line, straight out D line, DN, whatever it is. If you're in a sleeper league where D line, D tackle, DN is all one thing, he's probably not going to be this high on your list. If you're in a My Fantasy league where they're just starting a D line, no DN, no D tackle, he's probably not going to be as high on the list. For me now, if you're playing a defensive tackle league, especially a defensive tackle league that gives bonus points for sacks or tackles for the interior linemen, this is where Johnny Newton has a ton of value. I've seen him all over the first round, early first round, all the way to late first round. I don't think there's any way he falls out of the first. The only reason I think there's a question mark is he had an injury during the draft process and wasn't able to do a lot of testing. I think that hurt him. But I watched a ton of Johnny Newton at the University of Illinois, and the guy was an absolute beast. Dominated the Big Ten against some of the best O linemen in the nation. He was just everywhere. He's got a motor that does not stop. The guy's got crazy pass rush moves. I've got to say, I've said in the past, he's like a smaller version of like an Aaron Donald, DeForest Buckner, but I saw a really good comp today of Hargrave. So Hargrave for the old Steelers D lineman that now plays for the Niners, Von Hargrave. He also played for the Eagles. Just a really good interior pass rusher that uses his hands well and gets the quarterback. To me, that's what Johnny Newton can be. To me, right now, he's my number 7 on the list. Only 21 years old. Could have came out last season, went back for a year, and really improved his game. I think he's going to be a steal for whoever gets him. Again, he slides down my rankings in a league that doesn't start defensive tackle. Because you usually want to start more of those end rusher guys in that type of situation. But in D tackle start league, to me, I'm looking to get him in my drafts because he's a guy I think could be very advantageous in the future. And anyone that plays in a D tackle league and has a DeForest Buckner, has an Aaron Donald, has a Cam Hayward, you know how much more those guys score than anyone else. So it's a very, very advantageous spot to have a defensive tackle that scores you points because so many defensive tackles don't. They just take on double teams, they fill the gaps, and they just don't really pile up much stats at all. Jamie jumped back in here and say Latu is my favorite for the NFL. Sounds like somebody I'd order at Starbucks. Yeah, I feel like every time my girlfriend asks me to go to Starbucks and order something, it's like she's speaking a different language. I have no idea what she's asking me for. I'm like, can you write that down? Can you text it to me? And then I just order it like I have no idea what I'm saying. Just like I pronounce his name, I'm butchering it the entire time. So I appreciate that, Jamie. You're right on that one. So again, guys, like I said, Newton, if you do start defensive tackle, he's a guy that you want on your board. And I want him fairly high on my board. If not, he's going to slide down behind some of these edge rushers, but he's good enough and he has enough pass moves and enough motor that he could be a Christian Wilkins type in the NFL where he gets you, still 50, 60 tackles and 5 or 6 sacks a year. So even though he is playing on the interior, he still is a guy that runs after the ball. Like I said, motor never stops. He will chase plays down from behind. He doesn't just give up because he gets double teamed and stops. So he's a guy I am super, super high on, and especially in those tight end or defensive tackle premium leagues. The next defensive tackle who's right up where they're with him is probably going to go ahead of him in the draft. But I like Johnny's pass rush a little bit better, and that's Byron Murphy, the second from Texas. If you don't get Newton, I think Murphy's the next guy you want to look at defensive tackle. Some people are probably going to take Murphy before Newton just because there's a good chance he gets drafted before Newton. Like I said, I like the pass rush better, so I'm going to go with Johnny personally, unless I see where I like Murphy's spot a whole lot better than Newton's after the draft. The guy, he can rush from the interior. He's shown just crazy physical abilities. If you've seen some of the highlights in Texas, he was catching passes for touchdowns playing tight end and fullback. So anybody that's running out doing those types of things, like a Byron Murphy, hey, that guy's got the athletic ability. So also another guy's only 21, super high on him. A guy that just tests off the charts but just hasn't given you the production you want to see. This guy is number 9 on my list, and that's Penn State defensive end Chop Robinson. So again, he's dealt with some injuries. It slowed him down a bit. The guy absolutely shined in workouts, ran a 4.48 with a 10.8 broad jump. I mean, that's the athletic profile that just absolutely NFL scouts love. So somebody's going to fall in love with a Chop Robinson. The question is, can he produce that at the next level? I'm not 100% sure, but I love the athletic profile. Only 20 years old. So young guy, a lot of room to grow. He's top 7 on DLF right now. I am a little lower at 9 just because I like Newton and Murphy, the defensive tackles, in a DT league better. Chop probably slightly jumps in front of those guys for me in a non-defensive tackle starting league. Another guy that a lot of people are going to fall. I don't know how high he's going to go in drafts and the NFL draft, actually. But a guy I think people are going to be really excited about, and that's Jeremiah Trotter Jr., Clemson linebacker. If you recognize the name, he's the son of Jeremiah Trotter Sr., a former All-Pro linebacker for the Philadelphia Eagles. The guy's got the pedigree. He was very, very good at Clemson. The biggest knock on him is he struggled at times with missed tackles. He's got to clean that up just a bit. If he can do that, I know I've seen my friends that are Eagles fans just begging for Trotter in the 3rd round. If they can get him in the 3rd round, I love that. If he gets 2nd or 3rd round draft capital, I really like that for him. He would move up my draft board as far as teams where I need linebacker help. He would definitely be there. Right now, he's my linebacker 4 in this class. I've got him number 10 overall. Moving on to the next guy. This is an interesting one. We've talked about this before, me and Jorge here on Shoot the Gap. A lot of people are down on defensive backs. They said just don't overdraft them. Wait for them. Just take whoever's left. I don't want to overdraft these guys, but I'm not just going to completely ignore them. I'm not going to act like they're not there. They do and can win you leagues. So it's just I'm going to be up on these guys. And so my number 1, my clear-cut guy that I really like in this draft is Minnesota safety Tyler Newman. He's my DB1. I've got him 11th overall. He's 12th in DLF, which I have to be honest, I was a little shocked to see as many other guys rank him as high as I was. So it did made me feel like I wasn't totally out there on my own. He's just a physical player. He makes tackles. He doesn't miss them. He's an impact guy. He's going to get you interceptions. He's going to get you forced fumbles. He's a guy that if you want to, rush the passer with him, you want to use him in some of those blitz situations, I think he's got the ability to do that. He could be very dangerous with the right defensive coordinator on the right defense. I always say this, hate to make these 1-to-1 comparison, but a guy he reminds me a lot of is Antonio Winfield Jr., who Tampa Bay Buccaneers came out of Minnesota. He was the number one defensive back in pretty much every format last year in IDP. He won people a lot of leagues. He is my guy. I don't think this class is very deep at safety. As Jamie just jumped in here, says he thinks it's pretty bad safety class. I don't think the class is bad. I just don't think it's deep. I just don't think there's a lot of guys that end up being NFL starters in this class. And so that's where if I'm looking for some safety help in a league, there's about 3 or 4 guys that are pretty high on my list. Beyond that, I'm not sure I'm taking any of them in drafts unless they end up on a team and I pick them up in free agency once I find they've won a starting spot somewhere. But it's a slim class. But Newman to me is one of the guys I really like. I could see him not going till the second round, possibly even early third if he drops even farther than that. I think there's going to be a team that likes him and takes him in the second. I like Newman. To me, a very high upside, a guy that can make a lot of plays. So he's my number 11 player right now, safety Tyler Newman out of Minnesota. Number 12, this one's going to be a little bit crazy. And this one, my caveat on this is Missouri defensive end Darius Robinson. He was a guy that played inside most of his career at Missouri, but he moved to the edge this year, played from the end, and was just a disruptive force for the Tigers. Guy was very good. He really looked good at the Senior Bowl. I think he went from a guy that people were like, okay, is he inside guy? Is he an outside guy? He went and played outside edge at the Senior Bowl and just opened eyes. I mean, he really did. He came out of there and people weren't even considering him a first round pick. Now you've got him in the first round pick. He's at the draft tomorrow night. He is a Detroit native. So they'll be like, I think he's getting drafted in the first round, but if he doesn't, he is a Detroit guy. So I think him being there just because of that reason helps him. But I can't see him falling much farther than early second round. Just great size, 6'5". He was listed at 285. I think he's gonna be playing a little closer to 300. Great athleticism, ran a 4.95 40, has a 35-inch vertical jump. Here's a guy where I think he could play a 4-3 defensive end, but here's also where I think he could absolutely crush at the NFL as a 3-4 inside defensive end, where he is technically the D end, but he is filling gaps and he's got a guy rushing outside of him. I just think he's got the perfect body to be that type of guy. To me, he could be a Cam Hayward type, a disruptive 3-4 defensive end that can rush the passer but can still help in the run. He's a guy I have a lot of upside with. I like him a lot. Right now, he's ranked about 17th on the DLF list. I'm up to 12 on him. I just really like his ability. And here's the thing for me. He might drop just a little bit depending on where he ends up. If you are in a defensive tackle league and he ends up playing inside on a 3-4 in a My Fantasy league and you play in My Fantasy league, he will get listed as a defensive tackle. If he gets listed as a defensive tackle, I'm all over him because he's basically going to be playing the end and rushing the passer a lot, but he's going to be considered an inside rusher. If he gets listed D tackle, I absolutely love him. He goes right up there with Murphy and Newton to me. And depending on the landing spot, I could see him jumping over those guys for me at D tackle. If he ends up on, if he ends up on somewhere like the Steelers or the Ravens playing that 3-4 defensive end, man, I like that a lot for him. There's a few more questions here, a few more comments here from Jamie. Newton is my favorite, biggest impact DB in the draft. You do everything that reminds me of Winfield. So, yep. So Newman, exactly. I think Newman is what he meant to say. I think he's very similar to Winfield, and he's a guy just was all over the field last year, and he showed, it's consistently hard for DBs to score at the same rate every year, like a linebacker or a defensive end does. But I think he's a guy that can do that and score well. Someone that's moved up on my list here, number 13 for me overall, and where I would take him in drafts. So he would be the 2-1 for me in a fantasy draft. Now, this is going to be a little different because obviously we're just doing IDP here only. I'm not counting rookies. So again, this is a guy could go anywhere for third. Most of my leagues, this is probably looking like a uh fourth round selection in most of my IDP leagues. If I had to guess, was be Cedric Gray, linebacker out of North Carolina. He's my LB5. He's 13th in my rankings, 16th overall at DLF currently. He really just put up the statistics at UNC. 266 tackles the past 2 seasons. He was making impact plays all over the field. He did have a little bit of a high missed tackle rate. He also was on a defense where he was doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So sometimes I think about that. I think guys, hey, maybe are out of position or trying to dive in and make plays because they feel like they got to do everything. So I think that can contribute to a missed tackle rate as well. So I do like Cedric Gray there. Landing spot will be very interesting for him. But right now, he's currently sitting at LB5 for me. So what technically would be the 2-2 here. Trevin Wallace. He's a guy that's moved up for me, the Kentucky linebacker. He kind of was a little bit out of my purview. And then I started seeing some people talk about him, and I kind of started looking into it a little bit more. And I was like, okay, let me look at this guy. Let me see about it. He's tough. The guy played hard in the SEC again. Kentucky didn't have a great defense. I think from what I'm seeing, there's a lot of NFL teams that like him. I could see him very easily going on day 2 of the draft. He's got a pretty good amount of athletic ability. The biggest knock I've seen on him from most people is they said mentally he's got to mature a little bit. He's one of those guys. He's just got to kind of figure out the game a little bit more. Sometimes he's out of position, those types of things. But the athletic ability is there for him. So I've got him currently at IDP number 14 for me. He's 24th right now on DLF site. Little higher for me, LB6. So I think he's a guy that definitely can grow. Maybe he's not a guy that scores you a lot of points year 1, but I think he's a guy that can kind of grow into the position after a year of being on an NFL roster. Now, this one is going to be one that I'm a little higher on than most people and might be slightly controversial. Number 15 for me, 2-3 in my draft here, my rookie draft, and that's Cooper DeJean, the Iowa cornerback. He now is possibly could play safety. He could play the slot corner. I think he's got just a ton of ability, and I think he can kind of play all over the place. And so that's what excites me about him in the secondaries. If he gets on a defense that uses him correctly, I just think he's going to have a lot of opportunity to make plays all over. And I just think the fact that he can move around to different spots really intrigues me on how a team can use him and how he can be impactful. Now, the other thing I really like about Cooper DeJean is his return ability, kick returns, punt returns. He was electric at Iowa. Some of the new rules in the NFL, especially the kickoff rule, he's a guy, if he kicks and punt returns plus starts at one of the DB spots, I love him. Anyone who knows the plays in leagues where defensive backs and guys can score special teams points on kick and punt returns, those guys can be magical. I always bring up the story. I had Dory Jackson a couple years ago out of USC for the Tennessee Titans, and the guy kicking punt return plus played cornerback, and he just scored me a ton of points all year. He ended up being top 10 scoring on defense because of the special teams yards. So that's something you don't want to miss out on. So keep an eye on that. If your league does count special teams return yards and touchdowns, Cooper DeJean's a guy. For me, he jumps up because of that. Because of that ability to play there, the fact that he can play safety and slot corner, he can blitz the passer. He's a pretty sure-handed tackler. I like him there because I don't think he's going to be a straight outside cornerback. I do like the idea that he plays safety or a slot corner, which I think raises his value big time, especially if you're in a league that starts cornerbacks. If you have to start a corner, he's the cornerback I want this year. Devin Witherspoon from Seattle, the former Illini cornerback, he was the same way last year. I said, hey, if you want a guy that can play slot corner, it's a tough his nails. It comes up, makes tackles, can play a little bit of everything. Devin Witherspoon's your guy. Great rookie season after coming back from injury early on. So like him a lot. Cooper DeJean, I think, could be that same type of player. I like him in any league that if you just are in a league that starts DB, say you're in a sleeper league and only DB, I still like him. I like him even more if you're in a start a cornerback league and he ends up getting listed as a corner. We will see kind of what happens when the NFL starts because there is a good chance he gets listed as safety depending on what team picks him up. Moving on to number 16 for me, middle of the second round here. This guy I'm a little lower on than a few other people. He's number 13 right now on DLF. He's 16 for me, and that's Chris Braswell, the linebacker outside edge from Alabama. Guy, he feels like a 3-4 guy, 6'3, 255. 13 sacks last season is just outstanding. He's got the ability. He can drop into zone coverage. He can cover some tight ends. To me, it seems like fit for me. If he ends up on a 3-4 team where he's opposite another really good 3-4 linebacker, think an Alex Highsmith situation where he's opposite of TJ Watt. That makes me really like Braswell because I'm like, okay, they're going to be focusing on the other side. That's going to open things up for him a little bit. That's what I like about Braswell. So he's a guy that's very dependent on where he ends up landing for me, and that's where if he ends up on a 4-3 team because he falls and somebody takes him, I might be a little worried as to how he fits as a 4-3 defense and whether he's got the size. So that to me is where he's a little bit down on my list, but I can see him moving up in the right situation. Coming up on my 45-minute mark, so we're going to kind of speed through these last couple here. Braylon Trice out of Washington. I've got him at number 17 on my list. He's my number 9 defensive lineman. Trice has all the tools to be a first-round pick. He's just super inconsistent. He had some really good games, and then he had some games where like, is he even out there? He's a little tight in his hips and his ankles. Doesn't really get a good bend around the corner. So he's a guy, like I said, he's got the ability. He just struggled at times. To me, that makes me think he drops a little bit closer to the end of the first round, beginning of the second round in the NFL draft. He is a guy I like. He is a little bit older, 23. He is a guy I like. I'm just slightly lower on him than a few other guys as far as some of these edges concerned. Now, coming in at my DB number 3, this guy has gone up my rankings here. He's 21 on DLF. He's 18 on my rankings. That's Jane Hicks out of Washington State. I've got him as my number 2 safety. Is if Cooper DeJean ends up being a nickel corner. If DeJean gets moved to safety, Hicks is probably slightly moves back to my safety 3. But he can do a little bit of everything. Depending on landing spot, this guy could be an immediate starter. Say he ends up on a team like the Colts, who are just desperate for safety help. I mean, absolutely desperate. I could see him going, second, third round to a team like the Colts. If he does get drafted in that spot, I can assume he's going to start. So for me, that moves him up my list because I think he's a guy that can play. I think he can play deep safety, but I'm pretty sure most teams are going to draft are going to play him box safety. They're going to play him closer to the line. They're going to want to be in the mix on making tackles, be a little bit everywhere on the field. So he's the guy that I'm getting very high on in everything I'm kind of reading and following. Says he's moving up a lot of NFL draft boards. A lot of teams are really, really liking him and the value of where they can draft him. Number 19 for me here as we finish out my top 25. Braden Fisk, Florida State defensive tackle. Huge motor, a guy who really helped himself at the combine. Just really great effort. Showed a nice 40 time. Just showed that he was willing and could do just a little bit of everything. Guy wins with effort. Defensive tackle, again, probably falls down a little bit for me in a non-start defensive tackle league. But if you miss out on those high-end defensive tackle guys, he's definitely a guy that I'm going to keep an eye out and maybe take a super late flyer in my IDP drafts if I missed out on someone else and I need some of that interior defensive line help. Number 20 for me, Diza Isaac from Penn State. This guy just absolutely freak athlete, top 25 in the nation last year and creating pressures from the edge. He got there. He didn't get home a lot, but he was all over the place. He needs to refine his game. He's 22. Um, he just it just seems like there's something there that he needs good coaching at the next level to kind of coach him up a little bit. But the guy's a physical freak. There's going to be some teams that I could see liking him over some other guys just because of the physical traits. So that's where I've got him there. Number 21 for me, linebacker 7, Tommy Eichenberg out of Ohio State. Now, I think a lot of these guys now I'm getting in this range. Eichelberg and some of these other guys could end up being later picks, late third, fourth, fifth round guys. Um, but I think you're going to see with some of these linebackers, they're going to get an opportunity if they're picked a little bit later, kind of like the running backs on the offensive side of the ball, where, maybe they get picked a little bit later, but that doesn't mean they're not going to be in the mix for a starting spot. He's a tough guy, does a little bit of everything. Ohio State has had, pretty good track record of putting out some nice linebackers. So he's the guy I'm interesting to kind of see where he lands. A guy that that people starting to talk about, Austin Booker, Kansas. Number 22 on my list, defensive end 12, number 24 right now for DLF. Guy's got great moves on the outside, shows really strong hands, really good pass rusher. So I can see some teams really liking him and him going early to mid second round. He's really kind of moving up. Teams like what he brings to the table. My DB4, number 23 in my rankings, end of the second round here in this mock draft, is Cameron Kitchens from Miami. To me, he's just a little bit behind Newman and a little bit behind Hicks in that safety role. He's a rangy player. I think he ends up being more of a deep safety, kind of free safety in the NFL. If he is, that always kind of hurts a little bit production wise, just because the guys that's playing away from the ball, you're looking at interceptions and passes defense. They don't get a ton of tackles, so that always kind of hurts their value a little bit. So I do like Kitchens, but because of that, he scares me a little bit. He would be a later pick for me in IDPs if I miss out on one of these other safeties. A guy that I'm liking a lot, and I butcher his name every time, and that's Mike Sainstrill from Michigan. I always say his name wrong, so I apologize for that. He is a guy that just fits that nickel corner mold in the NFL. I just think he can end up being that nickelback, plays close to the lines, playing on the slot. He's a used to be a former wide receiver, so the guy has good hands, can make interceptions. Moved to defense at Michigan, and along with Colson, he was one of those heart and soul defensive guys on the defensive side of the ball. I can see him in a cornerback start league. I want him bad. I think he's going to be a guy that can get you points. I think he's a guy that can get you interceptions. I really, really like his possibilities there. DB league only, he falls a bit for me. But could he be kind of like a Kenny Moore the second for the Colts? I think that's a possibility. So I do like him right now. He comes in at 24 for me. And then the final guy in my rankings, Dadrion Taylor Demerson, Texas Tech safety. The guy, very physical player. Again, you can move around all over the field. His tape, he was on not a very good defense at Texas Tech. But he made plays. He kind of really stood out in the secondary. If I'm taking a flyer late in my IDP drafts, say the last round, and I haven't taken a safety yet, and I need a little bit. I need somebody to throw on my taxi squad, or I need a little bit of depth. Taylor Demerson, he's a guy I'm going to look at and probably filling out my roster there. So real quick here to kind of finish it up for everybody, running through my rankings and kind of my mock 2-round IDP draft. I started off 101, Dallas Turner, 102, Junior Colson out of Michigan, linebacker number 3, Edgerrin Cooper, Texas A&M linebacker. The 1-4, Jared Verse, Florida State defensive end. 1-5, Leata Alatu, the defensive end out of UCLA. He is my 1-5. 1-6, Peyton Wilson, inside linebacker out of North Carolina State. Number 1-7, Johnny Newton, my defensive tackle out of Illinois. 1-8, Byron Murphy, defensive tackle out of Texas. 1-9, Chop Robinson, Penn State, defensive end. 1-10, Jeremiah Trotter, Clemson linebacker. Number 11, first DB off the board, Minnesota safety Tyler Newbin. My 1-12, Darius Robinson, Missouri defensive end / defensive tackle. My second round 2-1, Cedric Gray, linebacker out of North Carolina. My 202, Trevin Wallace, linebacker out of Kentucky. My 203, Cooper DeJean, cornerback / safety out of Iowa. 204, Chris Braswell, linebacker edge out of Alabama. 205, Braylon Trice, Washington defensive end. 206, Jaden Hicks, Washington State safety. 207, Braden Fisk, defensive tackle, Florida State. 208, Disa Isaac, defensive end, Penn State. 209, Tommy Eichenberger, linebacker, Ohio State. 210, Austin Booker, Austin Booker, Kansas defensive end. 211, Cameron Kitchens, Miami safety, and my 212, Mike Saintsville, cornerback, Michigan. And then I threw my 301, my last guy in the mix of my top 25 off my DLF rankings, Deadron Taylor Demerson, safety out of Texas Tech. So that is going to do it for me, guys. I appreciate everyone checking me out. We'll have Jorge back in here soon enough. But thanks for joining me tonight on these IDP. You can check me out on Twitter or the X at JT Orange. I post all my written content, all those things there. I've got a bunch of shows that I'm doing for the draft coming up. I'll be on DLF talking about kind of some live stuff as it happens. I'll also be doing some pre-draft and post-draft shows, so check out there to see where I'm going to be at. And as always, jump on Fantasy and Frames, like, follow us, hit the notification bell so you know when all these shows are going on our fabulous Wednesday nights. That is going to do it for me. Thank you for joining me. Justin Taylor, JT Orange here on Shoot the Gap on Fantasy and Frames.